The Edmonton Oilers are expecting the return of defenseman Jake Walman any day now. They need the blue liner to live up to expectations.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers. I'm your host, Nick Zararis. This is my 10th season doing digital hockey content, my third as a host here on the Locked On Podcast Network, and I want to thank everyone that is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. And on today's show, we are going to be talking about the impending return of defenseman Jake Walman. We will start in our first segment talking about Jake Walman's expectations with the Oilers, how he performed last year in his limited role, his traits as a player, what makes him unique, his ideal usage. In our second segment, we'll go under the hood. We'll talk about how he's performed from a metrics perspective. And then in our final segment, to tie a bow on today's show, we're going to talk about what are realistic expectations and if the Oilers made a sound bet in giving the defenseman a long-term extension. So to start out, the Jake Walman archetype is one of my favorites in hockey. I am absolutely and unequivocally biased towards the offensive defenseman. And Wallman, by virtue of his really solid skating, and Wallman is not a burner in the way that a Cale Makar or a Mo Sider or a Matthew Schaefer is, where he's really fast up and down in a straight line. Where Wallman really shines is his smoothness and his lateral agility. With Wallman, it really looks easy for him when the puck is on his stick. That's when he is at his best. And granted, most players are at their best when the game is on their stick because they can dictate the tempo and the pace. But for Wallman in particular, as someone who profiles as a bit of a shoot-first defenseman, somebody who really uses their skating for defense because he's not particularly physical, he has the capacity to be a pretty impactful player. And this is where the NHL is going. And we're not going to get there overnight. It won't happen tomorrow, not next year, but 5 to 10 years from now, the average NHL defenseman is going to be a lot closer to Jake Walman than it is to, say, someone like a Jacob Trouba or someone like a Vladislav Gavrikov, if you will. As we get a better crop of defensemen, especially when it comes to skating and moving the puck, that skill set is going to become cheaper. And the cheaper the skill set becomes, the easier it's going to be to distribute. And the more gifted of puck movers we get on the back end, the more the game is going to continue to change. And Wallman cost a pretty penny last year. You know, you trading a first round pick at the deadline for a player that you get 2 playoff runs out of. I know they signed him to an extension this past summer, but last year when the Oilers had traded for him, it wasn't a guarantee he would re-sign. But the Oilers are going to get at least 2 playoff runs out of Wallman, plus the 7-year extension they did offer him. And last year, at even strength in the postseason, Jake Walman did his job. And Wallman is a guy who his skill set translates a little bit better to playoff hockey than traditional hockey thinking would lead you. Because we hear a lot about the need for size. And don't get me wrong, having size in the postseason is a big advantage. I think about that St. Louis Blues team that won the Stanley Cup all the time, where you had Colton Parayko over 6'4", you had Pietrangelo over 6'2", you had Robert Bertuzzo at 6'4", you had Jay Bouwmeester 6'3", 6'4". Everybody on that defensive core was at least 6 feet tall. The slightest guy of that mix was Vince Dunn at 6 foot flat, 200 pounds, and everybody else was bigger. And that has its upsides. You're able to withstand the punishment, the grind of a playoff race a little bit better when your guys are bigger. When they're bigger, they're able to win net front leverage a little bit easier. And that's an area where someone like a Jake Walman or an Evan Bouchard is going to have a harder time because that's not really in their game. These are not the types of players who are going to be able to clear the crease of traffic in front and who are going to be susceptible to those rebound and second chance opportunities because they don't close out well, because they're not big enough to cut down on the players who are going to be occupying that space. But where Wallman has the capacity to really change the game is as a puck mover. And this is where you want your defenseman trending. In an ideal world, you would have 6 guys all capable of retrieving and moving the puck. Now, because puck moving is still not as common a trait as retrieving, there are still more retrievers. And don't get me wrong, the retriever is an important role. For the puck mover to thrive, he likely needs a partner that can eat punishment, that's going to put his back to the forecheck, that's going to go below the goal line, that's going to win a 50-50 puck and get the puck over to him. That's why when we've talked about the Bouchard-Ekholm pair over the last 3.5, 4 years now going into this season, that pair is as textbook as it gets. The other one that comes to mind, you do Brian Dumoulin and Chris Letang when the Penguins went back-to-back. But that's your ideal archetype. You want one guy who's going to eat a lot of the punishment, who's going to move the puck along to his partner, and that's the guy that, in this case, Jake Walman, is going to be the one who gets the puck up the ice. He's going to be the one that helps your team go from defense to offense quickly, because that's where the chances are. And the more defense you need to play, the more challenging your game outcome is going to be. Now, that's not to say you can't be successful as a defensive defenseman. Guys like Gus Forsling, Jacob Slavin, Vladislav Gavrikov, Rasmus Anderson, Mackenzie Wiegers, who I was thinking of, excuse me. Those types of guys will always have value in the NHL, but you're going to notice as time goes on that they're never going to be able to make as much money as their contemporaries, as a Quinn Hughes, an Adam Fox, a Cale Makar someday, 2-3 years from now when we're talking about that first Matthew Schaefer extension. The game is going to continue to evolve in that direction. As you're watching in real time, shooting percentages have never been lower. Trying to rely on defense and goaltending to win you hockey games at this point is going to continue to get more challenging. As the average player gets more skilled, as the team strategies get better, they become more selective, they create more dangerous offense. All of these factors compound into each other and ultimately create an environment where it is unequivocally more important to be better at offense than defense. Now, I'm not saying defense doesn't matter. It does. But situational defense, the type that guys like Wallman and Bouchard play, is going to increasingly become more important because everybody's going to be able to skate. Everybody's going to be able to pass on some level. And as we get closer to that hyper mobile game where everybody is dangerous, the positions are going to blur, and you are going to need defensemen who move as well as forwards, who have puck skills as good as forwards, because we are going to watch this game continue to evolve. Now, Jake Walman has been in his career a situational player. This is not someone who's ever been relied on as a first pair guy. This is someone who, even at his age of 29, still doesn't have a lot of NHL games under his belt. I was kind of shocked when I went and looked at his hockey reference earlier in putting together my notes for today's show, how little hockey he's played for somebody of his age. And look, that's one of the detriments of this puck mover skill set. Most teams, they have their power play one quarterback. That's an expensive player, usually your most expensive defenseman. And without those power play minutes, somebody like a Jake Walman isn't going to be able to produce enough value for a coach to justify keeping them in the lineup consistently. And we have seen, whether it's St. Louis or Detroit, Wallman be someone who does get scratched at times. And San Jose is a little bit different. That was a rebuilding team that was inclined to give Wallman runway to build up his value, to try and help the Sharks get some value in an eventual trade. And ultimately, that's what happened. The Sharks gave him a ton of minutes, the most minutes he's ever played on a per-game basis, and he was able to play his way into value. And I really like Wallman's toolbox. I think some of the underlying numbers, especially in last year's playoffs, are engaging enough, interesting enough to justify some type of contract. But as we'll talk about over the next new segments, I'm not sure a 7-year contract was wholly justified. We will be right back after this quick break. The NFL playoffs are on fire, and FanDuel is in playoff mode. Every game day during the NFL playoffs, FanDuel is giving customers even more ways to get in on the action, because right now, every NFL playoff game day, FanDuel users get a profit boost pack waiting for them in inside the app. Each game day, you'll see a pack loaded with multiple profit boosts you can apply to the bets you like most. Open your profit boost pack first thing on game day and see what boosts you want to apply. The boosts let you lean into your game day instincts, whether you're backing the momentum, defense, quarterback play, or coaching. The boosts give you more juice on the bets you already like instead of forcing you to bet something new. Every play feels bigger, and the boosts make your bets feel that way too. You can make your picks and apply your profit boost to go after even bigger payouts while the playoffs get rolling. Visit FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and grab your profit boost pack every NFL playoff game day. Thank you so much to everybody that is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day, and thank you to everyone who's helped make Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you haven't already, look into the Everydayer Club. The details are down in the show notes, where you can get access to ad-free episodes of Locked On Oilers on your preferred podcasting platform. So, as we continue our Wallman conversation, I do think it's important that we address the context and the use, because there is no single bigger indicator in hockey of a player's capacity to produce than the role they play on their team. If they are a fifth or sixth defenseman who's only getting 15 or 16 minutes per night, isn't on the power play, isn't killing penalties, their capacity to produce value through offense is going to be more limited. The lower in the lineup you play as a defenseman, the less talented forwards you generally play with. So your capacity to break out, to go from defense to offense, to use transition play to your advantage is limited. And when you start to address the way players perform in their situation, especially when we're talking about second and third pair defensemen, who are going to get less favorable forward deployment, who are going to often be deployed against third and fourth lines, who are going to try and slow the game down, dunk the puck in deep, and really force you to work for your ice, it becomes a challenge in second and third pair roles to produce a ton of value. Like we talked about in that first segment, most teams are going to give their first defenseman, their best defenseman, almost all of the power play minutes at their disposal, because that is one of the most direct ways you can juice a player's production. And once you have committed to a guy to any period of time, contract-wise, especially on that back end, it becomes your responsibility to get as much value out of them as possible. And the easiest way to get value out of players in hockey is offense. And offense, by virtue of being more valuable than defense, you don't need to be as good offensively as you would need to be defensively to get paid well. You know, a 30-point defenseman who plays really lights out defense is never going to make as much money as a McCarr or a Hughes, because that offense is so much more valuable. And when we talk about a Jake Walman, someone who has a weird and unorthodox path to where they're at, where he got his first unrestricted free agent deal at 29 on this Oilers team, where he's looked at as a building block and signed the contract that's going to take him through his mid-30s, which again is kind of crazy for someone who doesn't have a big track record. So when you think about Jake Walman, his value, his production, for the most part, we're going to be evaluating him through an offensive lens. Are the Oilers controlling play when he's on the ice? Are they in the offensive zone? Are they creating offense? Are they creating dangerous offense? Are they susceptible defensively off the rush because the Oilers are more aggressive offensively when Wallman is out there because he's trying to tilt the ice? And from a game control perspective, Wallman's numbers aren't anything remarkable. He's been he's struggled this year, I would say it's fair to say, in the games he has played. He's played 17 regular season games, hasn't played since mid-November, and 48% of the scoring attempts, 49% of the shots on goal, 45% of the goals, 45% of the expected goals, 43% of the high danger chances. And all of that is to say, the Oilers did not get off to a good start this year, especially from a metrics perspective. They have asked a variety of guys to try and fill the Wallman role in his absence, and it hasn't gone particularly well. The Oilers are asking whoever plays with Darnell Nurse to play a very challenging role. And I, for one, wish there was a world where we could find a middle ground. And I don't think the Oilers are ever going to find a way to trade Darnell Nurse unless we get several years into the future. And we're only talking about 1 or 2 years remaining on that contract. But you are drawing the short end of the stick with Nurse as your partner. We talked about it on yesterday's show in the second segment, a little bit about the season he's having. The Oilers have been outscored going into Monday night's game 30-40 with Nurse on the ice at 5-on-5. And the Oilers expected Jake Walman to play this year with Darnell Nurse as the team's third or fourth defenseman. This year, when Wallman was healthy, he was playing the third most minutes of any defenseman on this team. And that's not getting a ton of power play time. We're talking 18-15 at even strength, 37 seconds of power play time, and then a minute 14 on the penalty kill, playing more kill than power play opportunities. He has spent 68% of his time on ice this year with Darnell Nurse, 15% with Mattias Ekholm, and they have spent 36% of the time against the Wallman has spent 36% of the time against the other team's best players, the second pair, playing a little bit slightly less than what Ekholm and Bouchard are facing. Those two combined face about 76% of the opponent's best players, and then that last 25% or so is left for the third pair, whatever it happens to look like on that given night. And what's telling for me is that Wallman on the whole last year in the playoffs had really good underlying numbers. 53% of the shot attempts, 57% of the shots on goal, 54% of the goals, 56% of the expected goals, 56% of the high danger chances. Spent a lot of time in the playoffs last year with John Klingberg, spent quite a bit of time last year with Evan Bouchard. And for me, that's what I would like to see the Oilers go to in these end of game situations if they're chasing a lead or if they desperately need a goal. We have seen Bouchard and Wallman perform at a really high level as a combo. I really wish there was a world where the Oilers could find a way to play Bouchard with Wallman, Nurse with Ekholm, and then we hold on to our butts for Spencer Stastny and Ty Emberson on that third pair, because that's going to lead to the most game control. And is it going to put Nurse and Ekholm in a difficult spot? Yeah. Neither of those guys is a particularly strong mover of the puck. Ekholm is not bad, but I wouldn't classify him as a puck mover. And in the playoffs last year, Wallman and Nurse even produced relatively good numbers. 52% of the shot attempts, 55% of the shots on goals, 67% of the goals, though that's only 2-1, 58% of the expected goals, 75% of the high danger chances. Those numbers will play. And granted, not a huge sample, only 40-ish minutes in the playoffs last year together, but that's something the Oilers could potentially work with. Then you look at Nurse's numbers away from Wallman, where he's 45% goal share, 46% of the expected goals. That tells you there's something there. And I think Nurse at this point in his career is maybe the single most volatile player in the entire league, where the bad is egregious. It is unplayable, but the good is just tantalizing enough. You understand why the Oilers were dumb enough to give him the long-term extension they did a number of years ago. The underlying numbers here for Wallman with Nurse in the playoffs last year are encouraging. Wallman's playoff numbers at large were pretty encouraging, and the Oilers gave him a really specialized role that I felt he did a nice job in. And realistically, Jake Walman is not a first-pair defenseman in the NHL. I can make an argument even. He's probably more of a third-pair guy than anything, but because of the way the Oilers play, especially because when they split Connor and Leon up, you're going to have two lines that can get going in transition because Leon is such a great zone entry guy. You can get away with playing someone like Wallman on your second pair, but ideally you would have somebody a bit more complementary to him than Nurse, because Nurse fancies himself a puck-moving defenseman. He is the one who is trying to get the puck up ice. He is the one who is skating the puck up ice, and the Oilers simply do not get the most out of this pair because the skill sets don't complement each other. But with that said, I do think Jake Walman and Nurse can produce reasonable results. Their playoff sample last year as being a case study for their capacity to move the puck. And ultimately, that's the plan. I don't see a world where the Oilers are going to play Spencer Stastny and Wallman as the second pair. I think that would probably be a better second pair, but I don't see the Oilers doing that. I think more likely than not, we'll see Stastny on the third pair, and we will see Wallman and Nurse look for chemistry as they go along, and Wallman's return any day now in augmentation of Nurse, maybe not being as bad as he was the first month of the season, gives you a bit more to look forward to as an Oilers fan. We are going to take our second and final break on today's show. When we come back, we'll dive into just what are realistic expectations for Jake Walman this year and going forward. New year, new systems. This is the time when a lot of us look at the messier parts of how we run our business and think, There's got to be a better way, and there is. Streamlining your communications is one of the quickest upgrades you can make. That's why today's episode is brought to you by Quo, spelled Quo, the smarter way to run your business communications. Because when your team is reachable, organized, and communicating in one place, you're not just working cleaner, you're creating more opportunities to connect with customers. Your whole team can call and text from one shared business number so nothing gets missed. Everyone sees the full conversation thread, which makes replies faster and more personal. It works right from your phone or computer. It can even help keep your existing number, and Quo's smart AI tools automatically log calls, summarize conversations, and highlight next steps so details never slip through the cracks. It's no surprise Quo is the #1 rated business phone system on G2, trusted by more than 90,000 businesses from solo operators to growing teams. Make this year where no opportunity and no customer slips away. Try Quo free. Plus, get 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/lockedonnhl. That's quo.com/lockedonnhl. Quo. No missed calls, no missed customers. Thank you so much to everybody that is hanging out on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers. There will be an episode later in the day today breaking down the Blackhawks game. I had a commitment on Monday night, couldn't watch the game live, so I will watch the game, not live, do an episode based on that sometime in the day on Tuesday, and we will resume our normally scheduled programming window on Wednesday. But look, Jake Walman has a lot hinging on him, and it's crazy to say that because Jake Walman is never played more than 70 games in a season. At 29 years old, he's only played 284 NHL games. And this is someone who's been in and out of NHL lineups for almost a decade at this point. And it is fascinating to watch some of these career trajectories for players who just aren't given opportunities in the early stages, maybe like Wallman. They have a pretty specialized skill set where teams are going to prioritize other players who they have more equity in. And I do think that really holds back a lot of NHL teams from reaching their full potential, because in an ideal world, you have 3 Jake Walmans. You have 3 puck movers who skate well and can shoot on all. You have one on each of your pairs, and the other guy is your lumbering puck retriever who does a lot of the gritty, dirty work, clears the net front, wins battles in the corners. And you have unlocked a better sense of game control through that. Now, there are legitimate questions about Jake Walman's capacity to stay healthy, how durable he is. He's never played more than 70 games in an NHL season. He was injured down the backstretch of the regular season for the Oilers last year. He's missed more than half of the Oilers games so far this year. He took quite a while to recover from a broken bone, and the Oilers have invested quite a bit in Wallman's future. 7 years, $7 million per to a 29-year-old. That's a real commitment. We are talking about a player going from the end of their prime through what is likely going to be the end of Wallman's career. Now, as an offense-first defenseman, Wallman's capacity to provide value through the duration of that contract might be a bit more sustainable than, say, what you would get out of a defense-first guy into their mid to late 30s, because starting from the higher point of that offensive production gives you a little bit more leeway as you decline. Maybe you play a bit more of a specialized role. You look at what Brent Burns has done in the later stages of his career in Carolina, now in Colorado, what Shane Gostisbehere has done in Carolina, even though I think Gostisbehere's probably aging a bit better than anyone thought he would. I want to see the Oilers give Wallman burn. Now, because of the way this team is orchestrated, because of the pecking order, because of the equity in certain players, there are going to be effectively favorites. There are guys that Chris Knobloch is going to play in certain roles no matter what. I don't think there's a world where we're going to see Jake Walman getting prioritization over Darnell Nurse, especially in end-of-game situations when it's a defense-first opportunity. Now, a little silly because Wallman is on your penalty kill and he does have the capacity to move the puck well on your penalty kill, which is something I think gets overlooked, especially when evaluating defensemen's penalty kill stats. Skills, excuse me. I want to see Jake Walman get real opportunity down this stretch. Now, he's not getting on the first power play over Bouchard, but we laid it out before. When we're down a goal late and Knobloch's running McDavid, Draisaitl, Hyman every 3 shifts, and we're running a short bench, I want to see Wallman out there with Bouchard. Is that tilting the deck a little bit? Is that rolling the dice that you're going to get burned defensively going back the other way, especially if we're playing with an empty net? Very much so. I don't love what they bring defensively, but I think when we're talking about end of game situations where we need offense, we need a goal. We're going to lose anyway. We got to try and get a goal. Jake Walman brings the most to the table offensively of any Oilers defenseman other than Evan Bouchard, and it's important that the Oilers lean into that. We saw it quite a bit at the end of last year. We saw it in the playoffs where they dramatically outscored opponents, where they absolutely dominated with Evan Bouchard. Jake Walman and him outscored opponents 14-7 last year in the postseason. That will play. And yes, the Oilers were dealing with an Ekholm injury, so it was natural that they were going to have to juggle things around. Wallman also played relatively well with John Klingberg. Those two did a nice job through the first two rounds. As the game got a little bit faster, they definitely did struggle in the conference final and the final. I do think Klingberg looked the worst he looked coming back last year against the Panthers. Obviously, the Panthers, a very forecheck-heavy team. Klingberg, somebody who struggles against pressure because he's a bit more of a puck mover. He's not really a retriever. But all of this is to say, the Oilers are hinging a lot on Jake Walman. He doesn't have the path to power play one time to juice his counting stats. This contract is largely going to be defined by his capacity to marshal Darnell Nurse along. And it sucks that we have to talk about Nurse like this, but he is a net negative at this point. And barring something weird where he turns it around and starts to make better decisions and effectively plays better, the Oilers are going to need to make the role of Darnell Nurse's babysitter a full-time role. Jake Walman has some of the traits necessary to do that effectively. Him and Nurse have played okay at points together. Last year, they were better than they had been this year through the first 17 games. But I think the first 17 games of the season this year, the Oilers were definitely off to a slow start. They were really bad from a metric standpoint. My hope is that Wallman coming back into the lineup largely serves as a shot in the arm, the same way Zach Hyman returning to the lineup did in mid-November. Now, Wallman's not going to get to play with McDavid nearly as much. He's not going to get on the power play, but Wallman is going to have the capacity to help this team out immensely. And the other thing that helps, you're going to have a trickle-down effect. Because Wallman's going to come back into a top four role, it's going to push everyone else down a spot. Maybe that means Regula sits, that means Emberson sits, whatever. You are making your lineup better by deepening it, by putting everybody else one slot lower. It's going to help your team's results because the quality of competition is going to be better suited for their skill sets. Now, to tie a bow on this show, I am optimistic about Jake Walman. I think his skill set is going to age okay. Now, he is going to be limited by the players that are around him. He is not somebody who can outplay his environment. He is not an elite player. He's very good at two things: moving the puck, shooting the puck. He's an okay to slightly above average skater, especially when it comes to lateral movement. If the Oilers want to maximize Jake Walman, he needs to be in those offense-first situations, which is going to be hard to come by playing with Darnell Nurse. But that will do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. Thank you so much to everybody that made Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. And if you haven't yet, be sure to check out the Everydayer Club. The details are down in the show notes. If you are listening on audio, we ask you go check out the Locked On NHL Game Night feed over on the Locked On NHL channel for the latest on every game every night. If you are watching over on YouTube, we send you to the first ever national 24/7 Locked On YouTube channel. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Until then, let's go Oilers.